And this is the Stella Culinary School podcast, found online at stellaculinary.com. My name is Jacob Burton. Thank you so much for joining me once again in this live episode, coming at you live from the Stella Culinary Facebook group, found online at facebook.com/groups/Stella Culinary. In last week's episode, we went over the Greek salad challenge, which is still ongoing. I did a video breakdown, which basically cut up the segment into a shorter, more digestible segment that you can go and review if you missed it over on my main YouTube channel. So that would be youtube.com/Jacob Burton. Not to be confused with our live YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/Stella Culinary Live, which is where you can find these live video replays that you are listening to now. Obviously available on our podcast apps such as Apple, Google, Stitcher, and anywhere else you download your podcast from, including Spotify. So we will circle back around to that Greek salad challenge later on in this episode. We'll talk about it more in the question and comment segment. We are going to run that challenge for the next couple of weeks. And again, if you missed it, don't worry. I will get you back in the loop on that. But head on over to youtube.com/Jacob Burton, and you can see my latest video where I give you a breakdown. And it's a really good drill, or a really good conceptual dish to not only give you an opportunity to drill your knife skills, but also to just drill your base flavor structure. So if you can actually combine your knife skills and your building base flavor structure and do it in a way where you can create numerous dishes with it, you're really going to jumpstart your culinary learning, especially if you're newer to the kitchen and some of these advanced level techniques that we talk about. All right, so first segment of this episode, I want to talk about a question that came in from Jordan. And Jordan says, I noticed that most home recipes just include very basic level ingredients, such as sugar, starch, eggs, etc. However, a lot of chefs use things like invert sugar, isomalt, xanthan gum, lecithin gum. Can you please maybe outline a bit the scientific properties of what you are trying to achieve, and then how and why chefs use these different ingredients, and whether the effect is really noticeable and or whether it's interesting for home cooks to try out. And I think that's a great lead-in to what I would call hydrocolloids for the average cook. Now, hydrocolloids, for the uninitiated, is technically on its actual technical definition, it's anything that will impede or lock up or impede the movement of water or lock up water in any way, right? So people think of hydrocolloids as these fancy ingredients like the xanthan gum and the lecithin and things like that they have a hard time pronouncing. But also, too, common hydrocolloids found in everybody's kitchen are any number of your starches. So flour is a hydrocolloid, cornstarch is a hydrocolloid, potato starch, gelatin. All these things will change the structure of water. And sometimes these work as emulsifiers because you have a head that is water friendly and a tail that is fat friendly, so it links the two together, right? Sometimes they will act as stabilizers, which means they will thicken things by how they hydrate in water. And they can be very useful with solving certain problems in your kitchen. And that's how I've always approached it. Now, early on in my career, just like every young chef, I was very much intrigued by things that were happening in the modernist cuisine, or the modernist cuisine movement, which is now kind of the namesake almost comes from that book. But you had guys like Ferran Adria of El Bulli, and then a lot of people that spent time in his kitchens, disseminating some of these more exotic techniques and ingredients around the world. And you had a lot of foams popping up on plates and fruit caviars and spheres, and all that stuff is cool and has its place and is interesting. And can bring some fun to a dish. But really, when it comes down to it, after the novelty of some of these approaches wore off, what was really important is that these hydrocolloids that were being introduced by these high-end chefs, which quite frankly had been around in the food industry for a long time in food manufacturing to solve certain textural problems, were now there for us to use to solve problems or get around issues that we normally wouldn't be able to do with our standard toolkit. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to list some of the hydrocolloids that I most commonly use in my kitchen that I think would be most applicable to not only home cooks, but also just your average restaurant chef or average restaurant cook who's not necessarily trying to do a high-end, modernist, fine dining food or dishes or tasting menu, but these certain ingredients will help to solve a problem or get them out of a pinch. Okay? So first one is xanthan gum, and xanthan gum is probably the most commonly used hydrocolloid. I mean, outside of and so for just conversation's sake, from here on out, when I refer to a hydrocolloid, I won't really be talking. We'll assume that I'm not talking about cornstarch and potato starch and things like that, because those are pretty common, right? So outside of that, the most common hydrocolloid used in my kitchen and in most kitchens is xanthan gum. And that's because xanthan gum is a great stabilizer. Now, a lot of people think that it's an emulsifier because it actually will help to stabilize your emulsions. But the way that xanthan gum actually works is it's what's called shear thinning, which means it's actually thinner when there's shearing force, so the spinning blade of a blender, stirring of a spoon, or even just the mastication of putting something in your mouth and chewing on it. That sauce, which is at rest, which is thicker, becomes a little bit thinner. And so because of that, you can almost imagine like a tic-tac-toe matrix that forms when you blend xanthan gum into any sauce that will thicken it and also keep the particles separated. So as anyone knows who has made an emulsification and had it break on you, where the fat breaks out of the sauce and starts to pool back together, what happens is for that to actually happen, you have to have fat droplets come together and start touching each other, and they create a weight, and they pull in more and more fat, and then you have a pool of fat sitting on top of your emulsification, and you have to redo it. You have to fix your emulsification. All right, so xanthan gum helps to prevent that, number one, by just adding some extra viscosity. So in general, the thicker your emulsification is, the more stable it will be up to a point. Normally, without any sort of added ingredients, emulsifications, when you add about 3 parts, when you go past 3 parts fat to 1 part water, you generally will have too much fat in that emulsification and it will break, right? But up until that point, the more fat you add, the thicker your emulsification is, the more stable it's going to be. Xanthan gum adds that extra bit of viscosity, and it also adds that matrix that helps to actually separate the fat droplets from each other and keep them from pooling back together. Also, xanthan gum is just a great little uptick in viscosity, right? So say you're blending, you're making a puree for a sauce or a soup. In last week's episode, towards the end of the episode, in episode 73, I went through and we showed you guys that breakdown of my scallop dish, which was just to answer a question based on, how do you sear scallops? And it actually turned out to be pretty fun. I think I'm going to chop that up into its own little segment. But I threw down a cauliflower puree, right? And as you know, purees are one of the 3 modern mother sauces, so our technique-based approach that I teach my culinary boot camp to making sauces. And so sometimes when you're making a puree, you have all the ingredients in there, the flavors are great, you're spinning it up in the blender, it's looking good, you've added some liquid to get everything moving, and you just need that little slight uptick in viscosity, right? So you add that touch of xanthan gum, just the tip of a spoon, sprinkle a little bit in while your blender blade is spinning on high, and it'll give you that little uptick. It'll also, too, give you a little bit of stabilization with your emulsification of fat. So a lot of the times when you're finishing a puree for both mouthfeel and flavor and for smoothness, you'll add in maybe a little drizzle of oil, a couple pats of butter, right? So the xanthan gum will help to keep that from breaking out. Now, the nice thing about xanthan gum is you use it in very small amounts, and it has a very neutral flavor, and especially because you're using it in very small amounts. I mean, we're talking like less than 1% by weight of the total thing that you're blending. It's usually closer to 0.4 to 0.5%. All right, so you can uptick the viscosity of a sauce that you're blending without adding any additional flavor, versus if you were going to use cornstarch or flour or a roux. All of those things you have to use in a little bit larger amounts, and they also have their own inherent flavors, which is sometimes good, right? If I'm making a Thanksgiving Day gravy, to me it just doesn't taste the same without a nice brown roux, right? So I'm not going to use xanthan gum to thicken my gravy. Now, a couple of points on xanthan gum. Number one, it needs to be sheared to be fully hydrated and incorporated, and the more shearing power you have, the better. So shearing is any time you stir something, the most basic level being stirring something with a spoon or with a whisk, and that's just not enough shearing power to fully hydrate xanthan gum, all right? So best case scenario, you use a blender or a food processor, but really you want to use a blender. Now, you can use a stick blender. You can use a stand blender like your standard Vitamix, and you want to just blend in that xanthan gum while the blender is moving. So if I'm making an emulsification, right, if I'm using the xanthan gum to stabilize my emulsification, normally my workflow is I put in my base water ingredients, because you're normally going to be doing a fat streamed into water emulsification, and I'll get my water ingredients blending, usually with some sort of an emulsifier in there as well, but you don't always need it because you have your xanthan gum, right? But even just like if I'm making like a blended version of sauce vierge where there's no stabilizer, you can still stabilize by the actual particles that are being blended, which adds viscosity and weight to your sauce, which in the case of a sauce vierge would be your tomatoes and basil and some garlic and shallot, right? So I get any of my water ingredients blending first, and I add just a little touch of xanthan gum as my base, and that's my little bit of an insurance policy. Then I'll stream in my oil or fat, whatever I'm using. So it could be melted butter, it could be olive oil, depending upon the emulsification you're making and the flavor that you want your emulsification to have. And I stream it in to where it's pretty much done, right? It looks like the emulsification that you want. And then at the end, if I have that flavor right, I'll adjust up or adjust down with either a little touch of water to adjust down, and I can add more water. I can get away with adding more water than normal, or any sort of water-based ingredient like wine or tomato juice or whatever, because I have that insurance policy from that xanthan gum. If I need a little touch up, I just add in a little tiny bit more of the xanthan gum, and we're not even really measuring it, right? It's just the tip of a spoon, just a little sprinkle in, and you watch that viscosity change. Now, a little pro tip is when you're blending something, look at the hole that's created by the vortex of your spinning blender blade, and it'll get smaller and smaller as the viscosity of your sauce gets thicker and thicker. So that'll be a good telltale sign. Now, another thing that you want to think about too is anytime you're blending something and you're making emulsification, listen to the motor on your blender, and the sound of the motor as it's doing more work, as your sauce becomes more viscous, will change, right? You'll hear it go, right? Kind of stepping down or working hard or slowing down. Now, there's a point where if you've made enough emulsifications and then have that oh shit moment where they break on you and it's like 5 minutes before service and you're already in the weeds, right? That it gets drilled into your head. There's a certain sound that the blender makes right before your emulsion breaks, okay? So get used to that sound and be ready to hit the kill switch on that blender. All right, that's an important tip, especially for my pros out there. You guys know what I'm talking about, but always pay attention to those audible cues, to the sensory cues in your kitchen, because those will let you know when something is going wrong. So that's the most common use for xanthan gum, is that little uptick in flavor. and to adjust the viscosity. Now, a really good use case for this is a stabilized Beurre Blanc. Sorry, a little coffee sip there. So traditionally, on a Beurre Blanc, which I have videos on both of these, so if you go to stellaculinary.com/SNS, that stands for Sauces and Soups, stellaculinary.com/SNS, you'll see two videos there on Beurre Blancs. One is a traditional Beurre Blanc where we make it in a pan, and another version is a stabilized Beurre Blanc. So in a traditional Beurre Blanc, you'll sear your fish, right? Deglaze the pan, or sometimes in another pan, hit the pan with white wine, a little bit of shallots, whatever other aromatics you want in there, but it's usually pretty simple stuff because it's just a simple white butter sauce. And you reduce your white wine by at least half, but normally in a traditional Beurre Blanc, what happens is they don't reduce the water or any sort of liquid in there far enough, but you really want to just reduce it down to where it's just barely coating the bottom of your pan. A lot of times you add in lemon juice for your acid, and then when you have just that reduction, like almost where it's gone, you start swirling your butter, and your butter is an unstabilized emulsion, right? It's a mixture of water and fat, usually about 75 to 80% fat, depending on the type of butter that you're using. And as you melt that butter, that emulsification breaks. So the trick with a Beurre Blanc in a pan is you want to melt that butter over gentle heat and have it emulsify into your white wine or whatever other liquid you're using before it actually breaks, right? Or without breaking it. And it's a really finicky sauce. And because of that, it's difficult to hold hot, so you have to make these sauces what we call au minute, so at the last minute. So you're on a hotline, you're cooking, right? It's busy. You're searing fish. You're making your Beurre Blanc, right? You got 5 orders on the board. All of a sudden, your sauce breaks, right? And now you got to remake it. So it can put you in the weeds in a professional kitchen really, really quick. And then in a home kitchen, right? I mean, how many of you have like pounds and pounds and pounds of butter on hand? So let's say that you're been cooking all day. You use some butter here, you use some butter there. You get to the end, you make your emulsification, you make your Beurre Blanc, and it breaks on you. What are you going to do? You're going to remake it. You're going to have your guests wait. A lot of times people just pour their broken Beurre Blanc on the plate and call it good. And for the most part, I mean, it's flavored butter, right? Flavored melted butter, so it's not going to be awful, but it's just on a Beurre Blanc. So you can use xanthan gum to pre-make your Beurre Blanc. Now, a lot of before xanthan gum, the trick was, which I always hated, is using heavy cream to stabilize your Beurre Blanc. But at that point, it no longer tastes like an actual Beurre Blanc. It tastes like a butter lemon cream sauce, right? So you can do the exact same thing with xanthan gum, where we'll do a reduction of shallots, and a little bit of black pepper, some lemon juice, and then blend that up in a blender, get it nice and smooth, add in a touch of xanthan gum, and then add in your cold pats of butter, turn on the blender blade speed up as your butter sauce thickens or your Beurre Blanc thickens. And what's nice about this is I can adjust the flavors on the fly. So I can say to myself, I want it to be a little more lemony, so I can add more lemon juice. In a traditional Beurre Blanc, if I do that, I risk breaking it because I'm throwing that water and fat off balance, especially if I'm doing it once my fat's already in there, right? So I can add more lemon juice, I can add more butter. Once I get it to the proper flavor that I like by adding the amount of butter I want and the amount of lemon that I want, maybe a little bit of sugar just to balance out the harshness of that lemon, then I could touch it up with a little more xanthan gum and get it to the viscosity that I actually want it to be. And it could be a little bit of a thicker viscosity than a normal Beurre Blanc, which means it'll cling a little bit better to my fish or whatever I'm serving it with. And now, as long as I don't bring that to a boil, I can hold it hot on my hotline for a couple of hours, and it'll stay nice and stable. So that's a really good use case for xanthan gum, right? You're taking a traditional sauce, Beurre Blanc, which has been around for hundreds of years, and it's a delicious sauce, but it's always finicky. It's hard to hold, and just by using a little bit of xanthan gum or this hydrocolloid, you are basically stabilizing an emulsion and making it easier to use. So next one that I use quite a bit, and it might be less applicable to home cooks, But if you bake a lot of bread, I like to use lecithin. And I use lecithin a lot in breads that have quite a bit of fat. And so lecithin is actually an emulsifier that it comes from egg yolks, but it could also, a lot of times, the lecithin you buy is derived from soy. So it's soy lecithin. So if you're vegan, you want to go soy lecithin, but also, too, if you have a soy allergy, you want to be careful of that. But for me, I actually don't like it so much as a sauce emulsifier. In my opinion, it doesn't really work that well. But it works great to emulsify fats into breads. So for your typical sauce emulsifier, like a like our beurre blanc that we were talking about previously, I would just use xanthan gum, which again is technically a stabilizer. But there's better things that you can use to stabilize your emulsifications. Even some mustard is great, right? I'll use mustard all the time. If applicable for the flavor structure. But if the flavor of mustard or a little backhand of flavor works well for your emulsified sauce, mustard is a great go-to. You can use your regular yellow mustard, Dijon mustard, grain mustard. It all works, right? Lecithin, not so much. You have to add too much, and it's just not as strong of a actual emulsifier in a sauce sense. But if you mix in about 1% lecithin by the total weight of your dough in a bread recipe that has quite a bit of fat in it, so like an unenriched white bread or a brioche, it'll give you a much better oven spring because what happens is the lecithin connects the water in your dough to the fat in your dough, giving it more structure and allowing it to spring more. Lecithin is also how a lot of people do those airs and foams, right? So if you take 1% lecithin and you spin it into a juice, so like you take cucumber juice, you want to do a cucumber foam, you weigh out the juice, say you have 1,000 grams, right? So you multiply that by 0.001, and that's going to give you 10 grams. So you put in 10 grams of lecithin, you blend it with a hand blender, and then once it's fully incorporated, you can froth the side or froth the surface with your hand blender, and it creates this light air that you can then, the trick is to allow it to stabilize for a second, so don't scoop it right away, right? So you're getting ready to plate something. If you want to do an air, you hit it with your stick blender, you buzz it kind of right on top, an air will form, you let it settle, so it kind of has a chance to stabilize a little bit, and then about 30 to 60 seconds later, you come back with a spoon, you skim it off the top, being careful not to take any of the watery liquid underneath it with it, basically just like a cappuccino foam, and you put it on a plate, right? So, and foams and airs are really controversial. Some people say they look like spit, other people love them. I'm agnostic to it. I think there's a place and time for it. Basically, the rule that I constantly preach and teach in the F-Step curriculum is you have your primary ingredient, which is why people order your dish or what you're making in the first place. So whether it's a filet of beef or salmon or asparagus, that you're featuring, whatever that item is in your dish that you're featuring as your primary ingredient, nothing else goes on the plate. No other secondary ingredients are allowed. No other garnishes are allowed unless they make that primary better. So if a cucumber or carrot froth or foam or air, in your opinion, makes your primary ingredient really shine and makes it better, then by all means add it. A lot of the criticism comes from people adding these various sort of flashbang style garnishes and ingredients to their plates that they're really there just to for the wow factor, but they aren't really taking into consideration, does this actually enhance the overall flavor of my dish? At the end of the day, people are going to be eating that food, right? So flavor first, always. And so you start with your primary ingredient. You always look at your primary ingredient rule. As long as you don't break that rule, you're going to be good to go. Now, gelatin is also considered a hydrocolloid. So anybody who has used or made Jell-O in their kitchen before, or gelatin to set something when they're baking, right? You have used hydrocolloids, right? So they're not that scary. If you thicken the sauce with starch, you've used a hydrocolloid. But gelatin is has some inherent drawbacks, or not really drawbacks, I would say. It has some limitations, right? One of its major limitations is the temperature at which it melts, which is usually around body temperature. Now, this is good because that's what the fact that gelatin will melt around body temperature is what gives you that delicate mouthfeel of a gelatin that is set properly. And normally speaking, you have this ratio of about 1%, and it goes up and down. It can be anywhere from 0.5% for a really light set, or just for some thickness, to about 1.5% to 2%, depending upon what you're actually setting. But normally, you take the weight of your liquid and you add in about 1% gelatin. I have a whole video breakdown in our food science section that you can find at stellaculinary.com/FS. FS stands for food science. And once you allow this to cool overnight for about 24 hours, your gelatin will be set up, and you can use this to line plates. Old school like banquet chefs will use to coat vegetables, and then obviously you can use it to set gelatin, and desserts, and any number of things that you would use gelatin for. Now, besides gelatin melting at close to body temps, or not being able to really leave it out at room temperature for long, in like a banquet or buffet setting, or so when you're having people over to your house, you're having a party, right? You could have some consistency issues with the texture of your gelatin that sat out too long. But it also doesn't stand up to acidic ingredients well, right? And so I ran into this issue when I had an idea for a winter citrus terrine, years ago when I was doing, a tasting menu at Stella. And the basic concept was I was going to take, blood orange, Caracara orange, some other citrus that was in season at around January, cut supreme. So we're basically having just the segments, we're removing the pith. And then I'm going to set it into a nice terrine mold, take that, slice it cold, and serve it with some accompaniments. I think we did like a black pepper toffee crumble, and like an emulsion sauce and some arugula. And the final dish was actually really good, but I could not get the terrine to actually set up with gelatin, right? Because the overall mixture was too acidic. So enter Agar Agar, right? So Agar is used a lot in Asian countries as they're kind of a gelatin setting of choice, and it's derived from seaweed. Okay, nice thing about Agar is it has a couple of unique properties. Number one, it melts at a much higher temperature. All right, so it melts at anywhere between like 130 to 140. So you can actually serve warm-ish gels, which is a nice novel technique. I don't really use it for that much because every time I try to serve a warm gel, I've just thought to myself, this isn't really necessary. But it's good to know because maybe you come up with a use case for it. All right. Let me just make a note real quick because I just thought of something. I'll get to that in the future. Okay. But what I really use it for is anytime I want to set an acidic ingredient like my citrus terrine. And normally with Agar is really powerful stuff. So it'll start setting things around 0.2%. So when you're doing your math calculations, right, to get 1%, you take the total weight and you times by 0.01, and that will give you 1%. So for your base level Agar setting, it would be times 0.002, which would give you 0.2% of the total weight of the mixture that you're trying to set. So in the case of my citrus terrine, I would make all my citrus supremes into a bowl. I would weigh that, and there'd always be, anytime you do citrus supremes, you have a liquid, basically just your orange juice, your citrus juice, in the bottom of your bowl. So I'd take all that, I'd weigh it together, then I'd strain off that juice, and then I would weigh out the amount of agar that I'd need for the total weight of the supremes and the citrus juice together, and I would hydrate the agar in the actual juice itself. Now, the way that you want to hydrate agar is you have to actually heat it, and you have to bring it up to a simmer, and you have to blend it really good with either a stand blender or a stick blender. So I will put this in the liquid, bring it up to a simmer, and I will blend it really good with a hand blender to fully incorporate or to fully hydrate it. Now, one thing about agar is it actually sets really well, or sets really fast. Whereas gelatin, even when you bring gelatin down to refrigeration temperature, it still takes 18 and 24 hours for it to fully set. Versus agar, as soon as it hits its setting temp, which is somewhere below 100 degrees Fahrenheit, it'll start to set. It sets really, really rapidly. So this is great if you're in a rush, right? But you will run into an issue if you take this warm liquid that you just hydrated your agar in and you pour it onto your Citrus Supremes, right? Because the coldness of the Citrus Supremes will set that into a crumbly gel right away. So what I would do is I would also take the Citrus Supremes in the bowl and I'd pop them in the oven just for a few minutes until they were kind of warm, right? So I'm looking for like bath water. 110, 105 degrees Fahrenheit. I'd stick my finger in there, and I just wanted it to feel warm, so I knew that when I poured that hot agar liquid in there, it wouldn't set immediately. So it gave me time to mix it, to fully disperse that liquid, to fully coat my my citrus segments, and then I'd pack it in a tureen mold that was lined with plastic wrap. Now, one drawback to agar is it's kind of brittle, right? Whereas gelatin, it has a really nice, almost luscious, velvety, delicate mouthfeel. Agar, especially if you use too much, is crumbly, right? So to get around that, you can use locust bean gum, and then also not enough coffee yet this morning. It's in my video. Somebody shouted out, someone in the comments. It's locust bean gum is one, and there's another one. Don't worry though, if you really want to get into agar gels, I have a whole lecture on it. Again, it's right with our gelatin lecture. So you go to stellarcorner.com/FS, and you'll have the gelatin in there as well, or the agar section in there as well. Now, another cool property of agar is you can it's reversible. It is a reversible gel through blending, meaning, so if you take gelatin, right, and you blend it up, you'll just get a bunch of gelatin pebbles, okay? But agar itself, you can actually take it, you can set a gel with it, and you can blend it and get what's called a fluid gel. So it could actually be used as a sauce thickener. And it doesn't always give you the greatest consistency. I've played around with this a lot, but what a lot of people were going to do, or what a lot of people did early on, is they would take something like carrot juice, they would set it with agar, then they would blend it up, and you get this really nice sort of shiny fluid gel. But it would sometimes have just like a weird sort of unnatural taste to it. And so you just have to be careful what you use it for. But the best use case I ever found for this was making Cremon Glaze, which is a dessert sauce and also a base that you use for ice cream a lot. Now, the thing with Cremon Glaze is it's kind of a little bit finicky. And once you get good at making it, right, it's pretty straightforward, okay? But early on in my career, I wasn't too good at making it, especially when I was in the weeds constantly, right? So I've discovered a little trick. And so what happens a lot with Cremon Glaze is you have to get used to how thick it is when it's warm, and then when it cools, it's going to thicken more, and it's going to set, because you're basically taking egg yolks, you're beating the egg yolks with some sugar and some vanilla, right? And then you take scalded milk that you then pour into the egg yolks a little bit of time, so you're tempering those yolks as you're whisking it in, and then you whisk that whole thing over a double boiler, and you strain it to get out any coagulated eggs. Now, if you cook it too much, if it gets too hot, then you have basically a scrambled sauce, because all your eggs scramble and you have to start again. If you don't cook it enough, right, then the sauce is too thin and it can taste kind of eggy, but really when it cools off, you don't get that proper consistency. And the problem is you don't know if it's at its proper consistency until it fully cools, which is why it just kind of takes a little bit of intuition. You got to make it a few times before you really master it. So what I would do is, in the scalding of the milk phase, I would basically take the total weight of all the ingredients in my recipe. I would add 0.3%, so 0.003 of agar to my milk as I was bringing it up and scalding it. I would blend it with my stick blender, and I'd pour that in my yolks. I would cook it, and I would cook the whole thing until it got warm and the raw yolk flavor had been cooked out. Then I would pour it into a hotel pan, and it would gel in the fridge within an hour, right? Because it gels really fast. Once it had gelated from the agar, I would then take it and blend it in a blender, and then it would basically blend it into a nice smooth sauce. And at this point too, if it was too thin, I could uptick it with a little bit of xanthan gum, right? So if it didn't set quite as thick as I wanted to, I could uptick with a little bit of xanthan gum. If it was too thick, then I could hit it with a touch of milk to thin it back out. So it made the whole process extremely forgivable, and it allowed me, as more of a savory chef earlier on in my career, to make this finicky dessert sauce and then have complete control over it, right? Normally, again, when you make that Cremon Glaze, right, the texture at which it sets at is the texture that you're stuck with, right, once it's cold. This allowed me to adjust the texture on the fly even when it was cold by stabilizing it first in a fluid gel format by using Agar Agar, and then upticking it with xanthan gum, or downticking it with a little touch of whole milk. So those are some use cases for Agar. Before we move on to some other ones, let's go ahead, give me a moment here to read through some of your cabinet, or some of your cabinets. We got a kitchen remodel going on in the comments. Some of your comments here. Could xanthan gum assist in stabilizing a sugarless meringue? It could. What I would look into for that, Chasey, is a whipped cream stabilizer, but it could work as well. For vinaigrettes and other sauces where oil is the main component, I found dissolving the gum in oil helps to keep it smooth and avoid clumps, which is not that common, but why not use the insurance? Yeah, so you could do that. So another way to disperse hydrocolloids in general is to cut them with your dry ingredients. So you can disperse your hydrocolloids in oil, which is technically a dry ingredient, right, because it's not water. But you could also disperse it in your salt and sugar and spices. So if you're doing something that calls for a lot of salt, sugar, and spices, you can disperse it in that. It breaks it up and makes it more easy to incorporate. All right. Okay, so another hydrocolloid that I want to make you aware of that you could possibly use, but is less common in the professional kitchen and your home kitchen, but is transglutaminase, and that is meat glue. The scary meat glue, the evil meat glue. Relax. All right, it's just an enzyme. Okay, it's an enzyme that basically exists in your blood and in animal blood. Oh, I know, gross blood. Ew, gross. Okay. But it's an enzyme that allows for clotting in your blood, okay? Now, this pure enzyme will create an enzymatic reaction, as enzymes are known to do, that will stick meat together. And so you can get transglutaminase. There's a couple different versions of it. I'm not going to get into all the different versions on the podcast because it just gets kind of in depth. But normally what you do is you just sprinkle it on your meat, or there's versions where you will blend it in a blender with water to kind of hydrate it, and you can paint it onto your meat. And then you can bind pieces of meat together. And early on, there was this whole craze where people were like, chefs are taking chuck roasts and cutting them into strips and binding it together and selling them as filet. I'm like, no, they're not. Shut up. You have no idea what you're talking about. I mean, they would do it for the news, right? I remember watching a news segment from Britain, where they went and they found some schmuck, quote unquote chef, to basically demonstrate how you could take, strips of a chuck roast and coat it in transglutaminase and wrap it in plastic wrap and into a cylinder and allow it to set overnight, and then cut it into something that looked like a fillet and sear it up, right? And yeah, all's well and good with that until you actually serve it to somebody who's had a fillet before, and then you're trying to charge them, $35 or $45 or $50 for a filet mignon, and it's chuck roast, and they're eating it, and it's super tough and chewy and tastes like chuck roast, not filet, right? So no one's actually doing that. Where it comes into play a lot of times is, number one, setting terrines. So it helps to set meat-based terrines. It's great a great insurance policy for sausages, so you can stir it into your sausage mix. But really, for me, when I'm making sausage or terrines, I don't find it necessary because in those use cases, it's more of an insurance policy. But if you're newer to sausage making, if you're newer to terrine making, it can help ensure that your sausage doesn't break, meaning that the fat leaches out, or your terrine isn't flimsy, right? So your terrine fully sets. But what I like to use it for is making roulades, right? Roulades are beautiful. You take a chicken, you debone it. You take a duck, you debone it. You throw some inlays in there, you roll it up, and you cook it. A lot of times I'll cook it first sous vide just to set that form. Then you ice an ice bath while it's still in the plastic wrap, right? So it's holding its shape. And then you will sear it on the pickup and slice. Now, the problem with roulades is just the overall presentation. As you cook them, as the proteins start to coagulate, the roulades want to unravel on you, and they don't look as nice and as tight as when you first rolled them up. And one of my favorite roulades to do is I'll debone half of a chicken. So you have your breast, you have your leg and thigh. And I do actually have a video on this in our cooking techniques section. It's one of the only videos on YouTube where I disabled the comments because I just couldn't take anymore. I was like, you guys aren't saying anything intelligent. People have this real weird visceral reaction to meat glue. It freaks people out. So I just disabled the comments so I didn't have to deal with them anymore. That was before I realized that, hey, just not looking at your YouTube comments is also a good option, right? Which is my current approach. Yeah, so I like to just take a deboned leg and thigh and a chicken breast. I'll brine them both in our normal standard alkaline brine, so 5% salt, 3% sugar, 0.5% baking soda. Again, the baking soda is there just for added tenderness, and it helps with the Maillard reaction. And after I brine them, I will take the boneless, skinless chicken breast. I'll wrap it in the leg and thigh portion with the skin of the leg and thigh on the exterior, of course. And then a little trick is once you wrap your roulades, and you can throw in herbs, you can throw in whatever you want, you can throw in a bacon inlay, okay? Once you, and I'll sprinkle, right? So let me step back. So to actually use the transglutaminase, right, the sides that are going to be touching each other, I'll just basically take a mason jar, or I'll fill it with the standard transglutaminase, and I'll put a piece of cheesecloth over the top, secure it with a rubber band, and just sprinkle it, right? Almost like you're dusting French toast with powdered sugar, right? You kind of want to use that amount, just a really thin, even coating. And then you'll stick the two pieces of meat together, roll them up in plastic wrap, and before you actually roll them, it's if your meat is kind of warm because you've been working at room temperature for a while. Once you do that pre-roll, that initial roll, you can lay them seam side down while they're still kind of blobby, and then put them back in the fridge for 30 to 60 minutes, and that's going to just firm them up a little bit more and make them easier to work with. Then you pull them back out, you lay them in some plastic wrap. I like to lay down 2 or 3 sheets just to make it a little more stiff and structured, and then I'll give it a good roll. Roll it forward, give it a twist. And again, I have a video on this in our cooking technique segment, or it might be kitchen prep. So stellachlorine.com/KP, or just go to the good old Google box and just Google stellachlorine.com and just meat glue, right? And it should pop up. So then I'll take that and I will cook it sous vide. My favorite temperature for chicken sous vide is 140 degrees Fahrenheit, 60 degrees Celsius. For 4 hours. And now you have this nice, beautiful roulade that on the pickup you can sear, you can butter baste, you can pop it in the oven, and it'll all hold together. And when you slice it, you have these beautiful medallions. Now, another way that you can do it as well is you can, once it's actually sous vide and it's chilled and it's cooked, you can cut it out of the plastic wrap, you can cut it into medallions, and you can sear it like a medallion. So it almost looks like a big chicken scallop, right? Which is cool. It's another way to do it. And in the past, I've actually taken 2 chicken breasts, and I also have a video on this, and you basically just invert them on one another. So you have, the thicker side of the breast going on the point side of the other breast, like that, right? So point side, thick side, you're basically inverting them, okay? And you roll this up, and you can slice evenly sliced chicken medallions from the breast once it sets. So it usually takes about 20 24 hours under refrigeration to set, but also because it's an enzyme, it actually, as you raise the temperature of the meat, it actually sets faster. So if you're working with sous vide, which is that long sort of steady temp, it takes a while for that protein to fully come to temperature because you're basically using an equilibrium heating instead of the normal like convection oven or searing, right? So as that's slowly coming up to temperature, that enzyme is hyperactivating and it's actually binding that meat together. But if you want to slice it raw, so you have it hold together as a raw medallion that you can then sear, you could do that, but you want to let it set in your fridge for 24 hours, right? So that's a good use case for it. If you want to get into making roulades, which roulades are a fun way to not only present your chicken, but also to portion and to execute, right? So if you look at a couple of Thanksgivings ago, I did a turkey roulade where I deboned a whole turkey, and you can find that on my main YouTube channel, youtube.com/Jacob Burton. And I didn't use transglutaminase, but you could. I didn't because I didn't want to freak everybody out. This is more for people to cook a turkey in a different way as they normally would for Thanksgiving. But what's nice about this turkey roulade is once it's all done, you basically have a deboned roast that looks something like a pork loin would, and you can slice it into thin, even slices, right? So it looks really nice, presents really nice, and it's a real easy way to do portion control. Now, a couple of honorable mentions. If you want to get into spherification, you can get sodium alginate and calcium chloride or calcium lactate, right? Calcium chloride is what chefs were using earlier on to set their spheres, and then they figured that the calcium chloride is kind of bitter. So some are using lactate, especially when you're doing what's called reverse spherification. So early on, you were taking your liquid, you were incorporating sodium alginate into your liquid that you wanted to spherify at 1%, and you would drop it into a calcium chloride bath, and it would take about 60 seconds for it to set up. You would then rinse it to get off the calcium chloride bath because it had that bitter taste, and then you would serve it. So then what they started doing is taking calcium lactate, which is derived from milk, so it doesn't have that bitter flavor, and they would actually blend that into what they want to set into a sphere, and they would drop it into an alginate bath, and that allowed them to do, and those are actually more stable. So where you do the alginate into calcium chloride, it starts to gel from the outside in until it becomes a pebble, so you have to serve them immediately. Calcium lactate into alginate doesn't do that. For the most part, the whole spherification and fruit caviar things is kind of played out. But I actually enjoy fruit caviar on rare occasions in the right use case. There's still this classic dish that I do every now and then I pull out where I'll do like an ahi sashimi basically, and I serve it with a couple different sets. But one of the garnishes that I like to do is cantaloupe caviar because the orange of the cantaloupe looks just like salmon roe, and you can actually find this on Stella Culinary as well. I have it in the completed dish series, but it looks cool. I think there's I'm a big fan of fish and fruit together, especially in raw applications. So another thing that I do quite often is I'll do like minced or sliced strawberries with a really high grade ahi, and the strawberries really bring out a very unique flavor in ahi tuna. So in that case, the cantaloupe caviar I think works. I still probably wouldn't do it just because I'm kind of over that stuff, but it still blows my mind how many regular diners are still impressed by it. It's still a sort of shock and awe thing. So if the use case is good, and again, it enhances the primary, remember that rule, right? Your whatever garnishes, whatever things you're putting on the plate need to enhance your primary ingredient. And in this case, I can make the argument without lying to you that the cantaloupe caviar does enhance the ahi, right? Then you can use that. And if you do it as an appetizer at a dinner party that you're having at your house, people will be pretty impressed by it even still. It's kind of played out in fine dining and in chef circles. So if you're at a Michelin restaurant and you're trying to drop fruit caviar on stuff, well, then you're probably not at a Michelin restaurant really, because it's just, the whole thing's passed everybody by. Another honorable mention is methyl cellulose, which is a unique hydrocolloid that actually gels when it's hot. And so back in the day, the people over, the husband and wife couple at Ideas in Food did a really novel use of this, and they're great. Check out all the books that they write. Just go to ideasinfood.com, or you can just search Ideas in Food on Amazon and grab some of their books. But really early on, like way back in the day, when people were still discovering this whole hydrocolloid thing, they were doing something with where they were doing a warm ice cream that they would set with methyl cellulose. And they also did this really cool foie gras drape that was set with methyl cellulose, where they would actually incorporate the methyl cell into the foie gras, and they were able to roll it out thin like a sheet, and then cook it so it's hot and pliable, and then drape it over stuff. I mean, it was really, really cool. But for home use, and what you'll see methyl cellulose used for most commonly, and what it was really originally developed for, is to keep your pie fillings from leaching out when they get juicy and hot, right? So a common workaround for this, or just a common thing that people do at home, and you'll see a lot in home pie recipes, is they'll tell you to toss your fruit or whatever ingredients you're sticking in the pie with a little bit of cornstarch, which thinly coats the fruit. So that way, when the fruit inevitably heats up when you're baking that pie, the moisture that escapes from the fruit is then gelated by the cornstarch, and it keeps it from leaking into your pie crust and making everything soggy. So another way around this is methyl cellulose, which you'll see used sometimes in commercial baking, and also if you go to a like the frozen section in your supermarket and you buy a frozen pie, you look at the back, a lot of times they'll have methyl cellulose and other stabilizers in the ingredients on that pie. All right, so that's kind of the rundown. There's many more, right? Many more. If you really want to get into hydrocolloids usage, go to your local library and check out Modernist Cuisine. It's a good book to have in your library if you're really serious, but also too, it's a really massive reference that people buy, and they end up not using it as much as they think that they would. So I always recommend that now Modernist Cuisine has been out. It's 5 large volumes plus a recipe book. It's been out long enough to where most local libraries will have some copies, and you can go check them out. You can reserve them online in the COVID era, right, and go pick them up and flip through some of their use cases there. That's a good resource. But really, the Chymos blog done by Martin Lurch, he has the Hydrocolloid Handbook in there. And again, it just lists all the hydrocolloids, and they have some example recipes, and that's a really good jumping off point as well. But the way that I like to think about hydrocolloids and the way that I use them in my kitchen is to solve a problem. My guys are getting in the weeds by constantly breaking their beurre blancs because they can't make them all minute because it's a real pain in the ass. So let's use xanthan gum to make a stabilized beurre blanc. I'm trying to set the citrus terrine. Oh no, it's a little bit too acidic, right? But I really want to keep on doing this whole terrine thing. So let's try some Agar Agar. Let's pop in some a little bit of locust bean gum to help to make it a little more elastic. Okay, so you can use all these different approaches with your hydrocolloids to solve your common everyday problems. For me, the only hydrocolloid besides gelatin that you'll really find in my kitchen at home is xanthan gum. And even then, like, I reach for it very rarely, just because I don't really ever find myself using it at home. Now, if you make a ton of purees at home and you're having issues with controlling your puree consistency, or you like to do a lot of emulsified sauces and you're having issues with your emulsified sauces breaking, xanthan gum is a good thing to have. All right, let's check out, give me a second here to read through the comments. Ben says, I have heard that it has been used in steak cooking competitions where the ribeye might have a large section of fat and they are trying to keep that away from the judges. Not sure what exactly that's in reference to. Maybe the meat glue. Okay, so let me see. I was going to talk about what kind of grills and smokers you may want to consider buying for the upcoming season here, at least in the northern hemisphere. It's starting to get warmer, but that's a much larger discussion. So we're going to go ahead and punt that to next week. A little quick tip, little culinary quick tip, going kicking it old school for my healthy eaters out there. So in a previous podcast, I talked about some of the ingredients that I like to keep on hand for healthy eating. And one of the things that I use a lot is the PB2 peanut butter. So it's actually a dehydrated or powdered peanut butter that's much lower in fat than your normal peanut butter is, higher in protein. And you dissolve or you basically rehydrate it with a little bit of water. Now, it's good just like that, right? So I'll dip celery sticks into it. I'll dip apple slices into it for a quick snack. I'll use it with sugar-free jelly to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich on some like high fiber bread, and that's a quick snack for me. It's good kind of carb protein mix right before going to jiu-jitsu or going to the gym. All right, so all the normal use cases for peanut butter, the PB2 works well for. Now, a total game changer for me, right, that I started playing with the other week is using it to make a Thai-style peanut curry sauce, which I absolutely love, right? I love the traditional Thai-style peanut curry. A lot of the times, though, it's pretty high in fat. So if you're on a keto diet, hey, more power to you, right? Rock and roll. You don't really have to make any other changes to it. But I can't give up rice, right? I can't give up bread. Really, I can't give up rice. I don't eat a whole ton of bread much anymore, only because naturally, like regular, like store-bought bread doesn't always agree with me, right? It tends to kind of bloat me. Naturally fermented breads like sourdough actually works a lot better for my system, but that's neither here nor there, right? But what I really can't give up is rice. I love rice. I love potatoes. So I do a more balanced macro approach. It just works better for me. So again, if you're on a keto diet, you can use a normal Thai style curry, sometimes with coconut milk, sometimes without it, depending upon the recipe that you're following. But for me, it blows my fat macros out of the water too much. Okay, kind of trying to get more balance. So what I do is I take the little bit of PB2 and I will rehydrate it with a tiny bit of boxed chicken stock or water, and then a little splash of fish sauce, right? Because that's an important component in the Thai-style peanut sauce. A little splash of fish sauce, a little tiny drop of soy, so you have that synergistic relationship there. And you got to be careful because the PB2 is already fairly salty, but then I'll balance that with some vinegar, and or I've used lime juice, right? Now also too, for every like 2 servings of PB2, which is basically 16 grams is 1 serving. So for 32 grams, I found that 15 grams of your curry paste of choice. So if you go to like the Asian food section of your or if you have an Asian market, right, they usually have a much better curry selection. But you take that curry paste, you mix that in, and then sometimes because of the raw heat of that, I will then balance that with a little bit of stevia, right? So normally you would add some sugar to it. So the other day I actually did this process, and my acid I used was lime juice. I threw in a little bit of chopped cilantro, and I used a yellow curry paste and a packet of stevia just to add enough of that sweetness to counterbalance the harshness of the actual yellow curry paste itself. And damn it, as if that is so good. And you're basically adding anywhere from an extra 20 to 30 grams of protein to whatever it is that you're eating. So I do that on like grilled shrimp, a little side of rice. I do it on top of, a chicken breast. I mean, if you're eating lean chicken breast constantly, I mean, you guys know that I'm not the biggest fan of chicken breasts in the first place. I prefer chicken thighs. I will eat chicken thighs still, even when I'm eating healthy. I just, I count the fat macros, but there's a decent amount of fat in chicken thighs, right? So it chews up my fat macros. So I have to plan for it, right? I can't have avocado earlier in the day or whatever it is. So I got to eat leaner during the day. So if I'm short on or if I'm, getting kind of stacked on my fat macros and I need some more lean protein, that's where the chicken breast comes in, or the grilled salmon comes in. And this Thai-style peanut sauce, high-protein Thai-style peanut sauce, works great on pretty much anything, right? It's a great sauce. So again, it's just your PB2, a little bit of curry paste, thin it out to a sauce consistency with a liquid of choice, a little dash of soy and fish sauce to balance, a little bit of vinegar to cut, or lime juice to kind of cut through all that stuff, and you are good to go, all right? And I will be shooting a quick little video on that coming up. Cool. So before we leave here, let's go ahead and talk about your Greek salad homework assignment. Now, remember, when we're talking about the Greek salad, we're talking about it in concept. Okay, anytime I talk about ethnic food, I always get in trouble because you have, people who come out of the woodwork and, tell you why you're doing something wrong, which, it's just kind of, no sweat off my back, because it's just, it is what it is. You're always going to have that. However, that's not to characterize everybody as being sort of closed-minded about their cuisine. I did actually get a couple of nice emails and comments from people that live in Greece that were inspired by my Greek salad homework. Why? Because their egos aren't wrapped up in, and their identity isn't wrapped up in a singular dish, right? They understand that we're talking about the Greek salad as a concept. And what I love about this concept, again, is it gives you the ability to drill your julienne, to drill your dice if you're going that direction, and to work on your base flavor. So you start incorporating this concept in your day-to-day cooking, right? I very commonly get people who ask this question of, hey, chef, I've gone through all of your culinary boot camp and F-step curriculum, the lectures and the written curriculum. What's next? Like, what should I be cooking in my kitchen to really drill these concepts? So I'm going to start rolling out these challenge dishes within the framework of the culinary boot camp and the F-step curriculum. And this is basically drill number 1, right? So this is somebody who has just gotten through the first section on flavor structure. They understand the basic building blocks of fat, acid, salt, heat, right? How you can balance things. And maybe their knife skills aren't super legit, so they want to work on their knife skills. Or maybe their knife skills are legit, but you can always drill more. Now, it's kind of funny because a couple of comments, the only negative comments that I've gotten so far, or negative-ish, right? On the YouTube channel is people who I think were triggered by my assertion that it's important for even home cooks, yes, even home cooks, to have solid knife skills. One guy says, good instruction, but for those of us not planning a career in restaurants, cutting speed is usually not an issue. And then another one says, I'm going to call bullshit when it comes to speedy knife skills. So what if it takes me 2 or 3 minutes to do what he can do in under 30 seconds? That simply isn't enough time to matter, and I sure as hell am not in a time competitive environment. My cuts are safe, clean, and accurate. That is all that matters. Now, back in the day, I would have responded with something like, hey, guys, we found the person with shitty knife skills, but I've just found it's easier to, let those comments just go unanswered. However, I will push back in this format because I don't enjoy getting into internet arguments with people in comment sections. It's just, like Jay-Z says, if you argue with people from a distance, you can't tell who's who is the idiot or some shit like that. So, yeah, don't argue with fools because people from a distance can't tell who's who, right? So I try not to argue with fools online, and not to call these people fools, but their comments are foolish because, number one, right? So first of all, there are plenty of home cooking tutorials online, right? That's all there is, basically, right? Even cookbooks that are written by professional chefs are dumbed down for the home cook for the most part, okay? So the Stellar Culinary Podcast, the Stellar Culinary Universe, has always been an answer to, hey, I'm a professional cook that wants to increase my professional cooking skills, or hey, I'm a home cook that knows that these recipes are being dumbed down, that these techniques are being dumbed down, that these approaches are being dumbed down. If I was a professional chef, how would I cook this in my home? How would I cook this for Thanksgiving, right? So that's the framework that we're always hitting this from, right? We're always coming from a professional chef and a professional cook standpoint. Now, there are no good cooks with bad knife skills. Bottom line, you might now think of all the people in your life that you know that think they're good cooks, but they're really not, right? Come on, think about it. Think about it. You know a name just pop into your head, maybe a couple. There's that person in your life that thinks they're a good cook, and when they cook for you, it's always underwhelming at best, right? But that's part of their identity, being a good cook. Those are the kinds of people that think that they can get away with having shitty knife skills and are still decent cooks, right? Now, even cooks there are people that are capable of putting out a good meal that don't have a perfect brunoise or a perfect julienne, right? But if you want to take your cooking to the next level, you need to start with your flavor structure and you need to start with your knife skills. And the point that I made in the previous video and the point that I will make again and the point that I will make again and again and again in upcoming podcasts as we continue to talk about these drills, because this is not a point that I'm willing to concede, is this. One of the biggest usages of time in your kitchen is going to be the preparation phase, especially if you're cooking at a professional level, right? All day long in fine dining kitchens, what do? They spend prepping their ingredients, slicing it, setting up their mise en place, creating their garnishes. Because when it comes time to actually execute, right, they're finishing the plates. They're putting the little dots and dashes, their sauces, their emulsions, their garnishes, their slices, their brunoise. They're putting those on the plates and they're sending them out, okay? This is why in a restaurant like El Bulli back in the day, they had 100 cooks in the kitchen. Maybe fewer, but they had a lot of cooks and mostly unpaid, right? And even then they were losing money. You go into a 3 Michelin star kitchen nowadays, you're going to see a team of cooks back there. Why? What are they doing? They're prepping shit, right? They're cutting stuff. They're peeling grape tomatoes because they look like little jewels on the plate. Now, the argument is, if all those guys could move faster, they could produce more intricate and more detailed items, right? Now, is this necessary for the home cook? Well, yes and no. Because if you want to do more advanced level cuisine at home, you're going to have to do more advanced level prep, and that more advanced level prep takes more time, right? It's a pretty logical and straightforward path. So if your knife skills are slow as shit, you're not going to have enough time to do advanced dishes. It's just pure and simple. Unless you want to spend like the entire weekend cooking, and even then you can spend the entire weekend cooking, and I guarantee you the amount of prep that you get done is going to be really kind of laughable because you don't have efficient movement in your kitchen. And as a professional chef who on quite a few occasions has gotten roped into bailing out home cooks who are in the weeds, right? You go over to their house and maybe they're having you over for dinner or hanging out, and or it's Thanksgiving, Christmas, whatever, right? You go over, and I always start by just hanging back, right? Because I don't want to get in people's way, and I want to give them space in their own kitchen, and I just kind of hang out a little bit and chill. But I do it for a living, so I know how to I know how to identify a stressed out cook, right? And I start to see that stress level build in them, right? And I'm like, someone's in the weeds, right? They're feeling uncomfortable. They know they're cutting it close. They're running out of time. Oh, they really should have started that probably an hour ago. Oh my God, they still don't have their onions diced, right? They're kind of screwed. So it's about that time where I'll go and say, hey, can I give you a hand? Let me help you with something. What can I do for you, right? And inevitably, right? They don't need help searing a steak or putting a turkey in the oven. They need help with cutting shit, Peeling potatoes, peeling carrots, slicing stuff, okay? Slicing an onion. That's where they're in the weeds. And you know how the fastest way I can bail them out of the weeds is by going in, and I usually travel. I've learned my lesson the hard way because a lot of people have really dull knives in their home kitchens. I travel with a sharp chef's knife. I go and grab my chef's knife. I hop into their kitchen. I start whacking stuff up. I find everything inside. Hey, how do you want your garlic? I want it minced. Cool, bam, done. How do you want your onions? I want them julienne. Cool, done. Right? What else? What else? What else? Give it to me. Right? I'll slice it up. I'll bang through all of your prep, and I'll bang through it so fast it'll make your head spin. Because then what's left? What is left after you prep? Come on, shout it out. I know you know the answer. After you slice all your shit up, right? What's left? Cooking, executing, right? That's the easy part. That's the easy part, right? As long as you have everything set up, as long as you have your mise en place, as long as you have everything in place. So, if you are somebody who thinks you are a good cook or wants to take your cooking to the next level, but you are trying to make the argument that knife skills aren't important, having speedy knife skills aren't important, you're just experiencing cognitive dissonance. That's it. You know, I mean, it's just breaking it down for you. It's kind of my job to break through the bullshit for you. If you think that you're going to ever be anything but an average cook with slow knife skills, sorry. You know, I mean, maybe you're a god among your family group because they don't understand and friend group because, their cooking level is they still don't even understand how to create base flavor structures, right? They can't balance salt, sugar, fat, and acid, right? But beyond that, right, and that'll actually get you pretty far, right? But if you want to take your cooking beyond that, at a certain point, you're going to have to start doing more prep-intensive dishes, which are going to take you longer to do, and you will inevitably run out of time unless you want to spend an entire week prepping for a couple of dishes that you're going to be serving and eating within 20 minutes on a Saturday or Sunday night at home. So, my professional recommendation to you, if you haven't already, is go through and watch the Greek salad homework assignment. And I am currently in the process of breaking down the Greek videos or Greek salad videos that I shot a while back. And also in there, I'm going to put down, because the whole idea behind this is a skills drill, right? Is to teach you the overall concept of how to drill your knife skills and how to create your base flavor structures. All right. So that's sort of the angle that I'm taking with this as well, is a skills drill that you can step into your kitchen and use to create any number of dishes. So I'll also be placing timestamps in the videos for how long it took me to cut these vegetables. And it's not a race. I'm not trying to bang through as fast as possible to impress people. I'm basically cutting at my normal speed that I'd be cutting at if I'm not in the weeds in a kitchen and I'm maybe having a conversation with one of my other chefs, right? And I think it's a good benchmark for you to have, because I think it's the speed at which I cut in the videos and the amount of time it takes me to slice each item is something that's easily attainable to any cook who just consciously practices. And so it'll give you kind of a benchmark to benchmark against. And by the way, to the guy who said my cuts are safe, clean, and accurate, that is all that matters. If your knife skills are slow, then your cuts aren't accurate. You know how I know that? Because the only way that you get accurate cuts is by using proper guide hand technique, right? And once you nail your guide hand technique, your knife skills speed way up, right? So that having that guide hand and using that proper guide hand technique where you're constantly in contact with the side of your knife to guide your hand, I can julienne an onion blindfolded. I don't need to look at my knife, right? And it's perfectly safe because my guide hand is what's protecting me from cutting myself. So I call bullshit on you calling bullshit. That's my professional opinion. All right, real quick, we're going to go ahead and scan through the comments here. I noticed poor knife skills on commercials, etc., driving my fiance crazy. Yeah, it's funny too. Every now and then I haven't really figured out the angle on this yet, but I do have a subscription to a website that has like stock videos and stock photos and stock music. And really, I kind of use it more for like music and for some like titling stuff for some of my videos. But every now and then, like I'll look up and see like, is there like a stock video I can use that will explain this concept, this really simple concept that I don't have to actually go and like shoot video on. And inevitably, they have horrible technique, especially when it comes like if I search for like a stock video of like slicing an onion, their technique is just god awful. So I almost need to make a video of like stock video slicing techniques and talk about where they're going wrong. Actually, I think that'd be a good one. I'm working on knife skills. I have a mild carpal tunnel issues, and I'm only 5'1". After thinking about everything you've said, I'm considering buying a stand to give me better height over my countertop and possibly a lighter chef's knife. My current knife weighs 9 ounces. Yeah, and also too, don't underestimate, Diana, the mindset of people that have bad knife skills and think it's not necessary to improve them. So just by you understanding that it's necessary to have knife skills as a skill, right, shows the kind of mindset that you have. You're not lying to yourself about holes in your game. And that's more the issue at heart, is people who lie to themselves about holes in their culinary game. So having your work surface, though, at the appropriate height is really important for the overall comfort of your cooking. If you're short, standing on a stable stool is helpful, or even having a lower prep table is helpful. If you're tall, a lot of times, like I had a cook that was 6'7", and he would flip a Cambrel container upside down on a table that was secure with wet paper towels and put his cutting board on top of that. So that way it's at the proper height, because if you're constantly hunched over, you're going to have some issues with your comfort while cutting. And then the same thing, if you're too short and you're constantly reaching up, it's going to be really tough on your wrists and your shoulders. Good knife skills are vital. Consistent cuts equals even cooking. Absolutely true. Better executed dishes, better cooking. No exceptions. Yes. Yeah, if you don't have knife skills, you probably cannot prep to an acceptable, accurate size, shape, etc. Important to cooking and presentation, no matter how much time you have. And that's the thing, right? Look, I love cooking as much as the next guy, right? I would argue much more than the average next guy or girl, right? But at a certain point, you got to get out of the kitchen, right? At a certain point, you got to entertain your guests. At a certain point, you got to clean up, right? If your strategy is to spend hours and hours and hours and hours slowly prepping your dishes in the kitchen, then you have a poor strategy, right? And as we talk more and more about execution, having good, well-rounded knife skills and prepping technique is going to be really important to taking your skills to the next level. Because again, the one asset that we all have that kind of puts us on a level playing field is our time. And there is no arguing the logic behind, if I can cut faster than you, if I can prep faster than you, if I can move more efficiently in the kitchen than you, then I can get more done. So I can have more complex dishes. I can have better overall ingredients. I can have better execution. I can take a 30-minute break before dinner service, right? Whether your dinner service is cooking for your guests of 8 or for a restaurant of 200, right? Having that break in between execution and prep is really, really nice. Having that 30 minutes or so, or even more, to kind of just collect your thoughts and to chill is going to really get you in the right mental space to double check your prep and execute properly. If you're constantly prepping all the way up to your deadline, then your execution is going to be off because it's going to be rushed. You're going to miss stuff because you don't have your mental game intact. All right. So everybody, we will be reviewing your Greek salad homework probably in 2 weeks' time from now. Okay, because I have some more content I want to put out on that to really drive the point home. So go ahead and watch that video, youtube.com/Jacob Burton, and you can just search, Greek salad on YouTube. So just search like Jacob Burton Greek salad. If you forget that my YouTube channel, just /Jacob Burton, but it's pretty easy. And so you can pull that up, watch that, start incorporating that again. And again, the homework isn't for you to replicate a Greek salad. The homework is for you to drill your knife skills and to incorporate the flavor building approach, which is universal in Greek salad, salsa, really anything where you're dressing with fat and then you're balancing that fat with acid and salt and you're doing your baseline seasonings. All right, so that can be any number of dishes that you like. So go ahead and drill that. Now, I know not everybody is on Facebook or a part of our Facebook group. So the main homework turn-in is going to be in our Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/Stella Culinary. But if you're not a part of Facebook and you still want to play along, you can take a picture and post your picture along with the description on Twitter or on Instagram, and you can at me, at Chef Jacob, on both Twitter and Instagram. And I'll check it out, and I'll add that to the stack of reviews. And also, too, you can go ahead, if you have a YouTube channel and you want to, if it's just easier for you to shoot a video. And also, too, it doesn't have to go out. So if you have because a lot of people have just YouTube channels where they don't have any subscribers. Excuse me. Because you just need an account to have playlists and stuff on YouTube. But regardless, you can publish a video on YouTube either privately or you can publish it unlisted. And if you do an unlisted video, if people have a direct link, they can get to it, but it's going to be hard for somebody to find it through search because they don't actually list it in search. And a private video, you can just send me a private link, right? So if you want to do a video where you make your Greek salad and you shoot a video of your dish while you explain it to me, then you can just upload that to your YouTube channel, set it to private or unlisted, shoot me a link and I'll review it there. Also, too, if you're struggling with your knife skills, if you feel like you're at a sticking point and you want some help correcting those, go ahead and have somebody just hold your cell phone camera as they shoot video of you slicing something or doing whatever knife skill technique you feel that you're struggling with. And you can post that either in our Facebook group as a video, or again, you can post it to your YouTube channel and tag me. Questions and comments and also homework assignments, you can send to me, jacob@stellaculinary.com. However, I do try and get through my emails and respond to all my emails, but I get a ton of Nigerian princes that want to make me rich, and I just, I've sworn myself to poverty, so I going through all of their requests and people trying to sell me stuff and contact me, it makes email a pretty inefficient way to get a hold of me. But I'm pretty available, right? Shoot me an email, jacob@stellaculinary.com, facebook.com/group/stellaculinary, at Chef Jacob on Twitter and Instagram, /Chef or /Jacob Burton on YouTube, and then /Stella Culinary Live on YouTube to watch the live video replay of this podcast. Thanks to everybody for tuning in. I hope everyone has a fantastic weekend and everyone cooks something delicious.